World News Today, brought to you by Admiral Corporation, world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers. This program is presented in behalf of Admiral dealers all over America. By shortwave broadcast direct from important overseas stations and leading news centers in our own country, CBS reporters are waiting to bring you first-hand news from the world's political and battlefronts. Now here's Douglas Edwards.
Dispatches from the continent today are telling of a new drive on the American First Army front. Columbia's Bill Downs reports that the Americans began an attack towards the Siegfried Line at 4 this morning in a heavy snowstorm. He says progress has been good. American and British heavy bombers, more than 1,200 strong, struck two great blows today at Germany's war industries. The Germans are saying that Russian troops are battering at the Oder River line in Silesia along a 130-mile front. Marshal Stalin announces the capture of the great Polish coal center of Katowice. The battle continues at Schneidemühl inside Brandenburg province. In the Pacific, the American Sixth Army is less than 10 miles from San Fernando, capital of Pampanga province. Our troops are some 40 miles from Manila. Admiral Nimitz sent a communique today from a point several thousand miles west of Pearl Harbor, his new headquarters. The communique gave new details of how the Third Fleet shot up Jap ships and planes off Formosa and the Ryukyu Islands last week. 60,000 tons of ships sunk, 65,000 tons damaged, 300 Jap planes destroyed or damaged. And now, news direct from France. Admiral takes you to Supreme Headquarters in Paris. Richard C. Hottelet reporting.
It's been snowing along the entire front today. Scattered snow showers, the weatherman calls it. But the heavy, low, gray sky and the whirling flakes have kept our tactical planes on the ground. And on the flats of Holland, on the plain east of Aachen, in the Ardennes, in Luxembourg, Alsace, and the Vosges, the snow has made everything tougher. Nowhere along the entire front has there been more than local fighting. In the northern sector, where British and American troops have been ironing out the salient west of the Roar River, they had 4 inches of snow last night. And new snow is deadly in that kind of fighting. It hides all trace of the enemy, hides his mines and his booby traps. And you've not only got to work harder to keep going, you've got to be twice as careful. But Allied troops have pushed on ahead, and except for a few German strong points, we now have all the ground west of the Roar River, and with it, better jump-off positions toward the Ruhr. The enemy has been fighting a skillful rearguard action up here, using the ground and his comparatively weak forces to best advantage. Further south in the Ardennes, it's the same story. Only here, we're pushing on to the German border on a wide front. The enemy is fighting hardest near the shoulders of his former salient, up around Saint-Vite and down around Vianden in Luxembourg. But we've made progress. And to all practical intents and purposes, we're back to where we were 6 weeks ago. That is, as far as ground goes. We're told today that the Allies have taken more than 50,000 German prisoners in the Ardennes since December 16th. Add to that the thousands of dead and wounded the enemy suffered, the thousands of guns and tanks and vehicles he left behind, and you see that the Germans are undoubtedly in a worse position than when they started. Their great mobile reserve has melted away, and the strength they lost will be badly needed when we take up the battle for the Rhine, where we were forced to leave off. Because the Germans did not put an end to our winter offensive, they merely interrupted it. This is Richard C. Hottelet at Supreme Headquarters, returning you to Admiral in New York.
And now Admiral takes you again overseas to CBS London. Larry LeSueur reporting.
Yes, sir.
The American 8th Air Force today commemorated its 3rd anniversary. It broke the bad weather lull and went after targets in the Reich. These targets have not yet been named, but most likely they were not far from our front lines, because 3 years of studying air power has convinced our air chiefs that the best way of finishing this war is to help our own troops. The day of deep air penetrations is over in Europe. The Russian advance has removed most of the former targets of our 15th Air Force in Italy, while on the Western Front, we found that the very sight and knowledge that our heavies are bombing ahead of the front lines is of inestimable morale value to our boys on the ground. The Russians, who seem to be making progress without benefit of air support because of blizzards, announced the capture of a memorable named city today, which all Britain remembers as the first city to be named in a communique in this long war. Katowice, named in the German communique of September 1st, 1939, when total war first rushed over the Polish plains. Today, rumors of peace moves are coming into London from neutral capitals. but the British public and press are treating them with admirable reserve. The latest is that the Russians may set up their Free German Committee of captured German officers as a provisional German government in Königsberg when it is taken, and that Hitler may make an offer to this committee if he broadcasts next Tuesday, the 11th anniversary of his accession to power. Such speculations have been nourished by the fact that the Gestapo has so far taken no action against the relatives of General Seydlitz and Field Marshal von Paulus and other members of the Moscow-sponsored committee. And on the eve of the Big Three conference, London is coming around to the idea that it will be held not far from South Russia because of the staggering Russian war news. It's also felt here that the reported Moscow request for a huge American loan will be a strong card in President Roosevelt's hand at the coming conference. And this is Larry Lasser returning you now to Admiral in New York.
We'll have more news in just a moment, but first here is Warren Sweeney with a message from Admiral.
I wish all of you could have heard a little scene that happened one morning last week at the Williams home over on Elm Street. It went like this.
Hello, honey. Breakfast ready yet?
Oh,
Say, what are you doing mopping the kitchen floor at this hour? Do you want me to be late to work again?
I'm sorry, Jim. But I defrosted the refrigerator last night, and the pan was so full that I spilled water all over the floor and in the refrigerator. Just got to clean it up. It's a mess.
You know, I was reading a magazine ad on the way home last night about this Admiral dual temp refrigerator that doesn't have any coils to defrost. I'm glad some manufacturer like Admiral has finally come up with an answer to this defrosting job. After the war, we're going to have an Admiral.
You know, Betty's mother has a dual temp, and she's crazy about it. She can quick freeze all kinds of foods, and she never has to use covered dishes.
Yes, you hear it everywhere. Every day, more and more American homemakers are voicing their preference for a post-war Admiral Dual Temp, because Dual Temp is the successor to the ordinary mechanical refrigerator, and only Admiral can build a Dual Temp. Now, here once again is Douglas Edwards.
Earlier today, Columbia's correspondent Bill Downs reported from the First Army front that General Hodges' First Army is on the move again, jumping off early this morning in an attack toward the Siegfried Line. Now, news direct from Bill Downs in Belgium. Admiral takes you to the First Army front. Bill Downs reporting.
The United States First Army tonight is advancing towards the Siegfried Line, and the pressure which broke the Germans in the east now is being brought to bear from the west. First Army infantry elements jumped off at 4 o'clock this morning, attacking in the dark during one of the heaviest snowstorms of the winter. The Germans thought that an attack under such conditions was impossible. They were keeping warm in their dugouts and pillboxes. But the Germans were wrong. Our troops sometimes waded waist deep through the snow to get to their objectives. The surprise of their attack paid off in gains of up to 1.5 miles. The 1st Infantry Division took 3 towns east of Malmedy. Other infantry elements took another town. 200 surprised and resentful Germans were captured in the opening stages of the attack, and our losses were light. The First Army troops have struck on a front stretching north of St. Vith. The Siegfried Line curves inward towards Germany along the Ardennes ridges in this sector, but at the nearest point, the 1st Infantry Division stands about 2.5 miles from the Siegfried, and the advance continues. Don't expect fighting on the scale of the Russian gains from this renewed First Army attack. The Siegfried is more than a single line of fortifications, and the deep snow in this hilly, forested country is a difficult obstacle without any enemy opposition. The coming battles are going to be bloody and bitter, an infantry dogfight. But the important thing is that the pressure is on from the west and the east. Out on the front tonight, thousands of cold and tired doughboys are climbing through the snow. It's so deep that you literally have to climb through it. Dressed in their white snowsuits, they move like ghosts through the forests and over the hills. And 600 miles to the east, the same kind of cold, tired, white-clad soldiers are moving towards the west. It forms the world's greatest military squeeze play. The squeeze play will end when those American doughboys shake hands with those Russian soldiers somewhere in Germany. And this is Bill Downs with the First Army, returning you to Admiral.
An Air Force sergeant from Tennessee recently had the experience of dangling outside a B-29 while it was over Nagoya. For an interview with him, Admiral takes you now to General Hospital, Pearl Harbor. Tim Lemert reporting.
Here with me in North Sector General Hospital at Schofield Barracks, about 25 miles from Honolulu, is Sergeant James R. Kranz of Clarksville, Tennessee, who is the hero of one of the most amazing escapes from death in the whole war. Sergeant Kranz was blown out of his super fortress over Japan and is here to tell about it. Just what happened, Sergeant Kranz?
I was doing it with our 7th mission, and the target for the day was Nagoya. We ran into some pretty heavy fighter opposition on the way up. And then over Nagoya, the anti-aircraft fire started in. I was sitting at my blister keeping a watch for fighters when all of a sudden the blister blew off. And I was shooting out into space. You see, the pressurizing had been broken, and the sudden rush of air out of the opening took me with it. The next thing I knew, I was hanging outside of the plane by my safety strap.
Sergeant, just what was that safety strap that you were wearing?
The regular safety strap that we wear doesn't give us enough freedom to put on our flight suits and to move around like we need to, so we usually take it off. On the mission before, one of the other gunners was almost blown out in the same way. So I got some straps from an old parachute and made the special strap that I was wearing for the first time.
I see. But what happened when you found yourself outside the plane?
I had been shot out so quickly and with such force that my oxygen mask and gloves had been blown off. On the way out, one of my legs had caught in the hole, and I tried to keep it there so that the other fellows could pull me back. I remained conscious for about 2 minutes and then began to pass out as we were above 4,000 feet in the air. My hands were getting very cold since the temperature was 18 degrees below freezing. However, I wasn't too worried because I knew that my strap would hold me. The last thing that I remembered before everything went by black was seeing the railroad yards and Nagoya right below me.
How long did you stay out there?
The rest of the crew was pretty busy, and they couldn't get to me right away. The flight surgeon in another plane timed me and told me later that I was out for about 15 minutes. By the time that they could help me, my foot had slipped, and I was hanging like a rag doll by my waist. At first, they couldn't reach me, but finally, 3 of them were able to pull me up by my harness.
How long had you been back in the plane before you came to?
Not too long. Since I had lost my oxygen mask and there were no extra ones in the plane, 2 of the crew shared one oxygen mask by passing it back and forth. They gave me one of theirs. They rubbed my hands, which had been badly frozen, to start the circulation. They gave me plasma and morphine.
Sure that the infantry would get into us eventually. But how long, we didn't know. There was quite a little fighting going on between us and the Japs, and we started getting some wounded. We didn't have a doctor, so we used the first aid kits we had on hand. Then we got the idea that maybe somehow we could fly those Cubs out of there with the wounded.
Well, Lieutenant, wasn't that pretty risky? Those small, slow planes against all that Japanese fire?
Well, we talked it over for quite a while, believe me. We finally doped it out. If our men could concentrate fire in front of the planes taking off, we could make it, even though the Japs were all along the other side of the airstrip. Each plane could carry 1 wounded man. The other 6 pilots were going to go on to spot for our artillery after landing their wounded. But I decided to keep on coming back for more wounded. So I was the last one to take off. The taxi lane to the strip was very rough, so we filled it with rocks and put palm leaves over the ruts. But it was still pretty bumpy. I gunned her as much as possible and hit the strip in a big ground loop for speed.
Were these Japs shooting at you?
Yes, they were shooting plenty, but I got off with only a few holes in the plane. I flew to the field hospital and came back, the second trip, to take a young Filipino girl who had been wounded there. She couldn't speak English and never had been in a plane. But during a forced landing north of Ormoc, I'd picked up 2 Filipino guerrillas and brought them with me. They talked her into it. She was a very game little girl.
What about those grenades you were throwing at the Japs?
Well, we would take as many grenades as we could carry and toss them at the Japs as we flew over their lines. One morning of the 6th, there was a big commotion and heavy fighting, and we figured the whole Jap army was coming in. I went up and was trying to find the main Jap strength and tossed what grenades I had. Then I went back for some more.
Well, didn't you know you can't fly those little Piper Cubs as combat planes without getting hurt?
We didn't have much time to think about that.
How many trips did you make with the wounded?
I made 6 before I got hit. By this time, the Cub was full of bullet holes, like a sieve. It had rained terribly the night before, and the Japs were attacking all night. I was tired, and the boys we were taking out weighed quite a bit. The field was soft, and it was difficult to get up flying speed so we could take off. This Jap auto rifleman finally hit me in the leg, so I took the wounded man and myself both to the hospital.
What about the plane?
I gave it to a sergeant at the ambulance station. He was pretty surprised when he took it. I feel sure that after they'd patched her up, somebody's getting some good out of that old Cub. She was a good craft.
Well, we're glad to know the wounded you flew out were okay and that the infantry finally fought through to the airstrip and that your wound is getting well. Thanks, Lieutenant Robert Boone, and good luck. This is Webley Edwards at Fleet Headquarters, Pearl Harbor. I return you to Admiral in New York.
As you know, the Red Army is now engaged in another powerful drive below Warsaw. For a summary of the situation on the Eastern Front, here is Columbia's military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott.
The Russians have launched their long-expected major winter offensive in central Poland. This news overshadows every other event of the week on the Russian front. The Russian offensive has come exactly where it was expected, from the long-held Russian bridgehead across the Middle Vistula, about 75 miles south of Warsaw. Its first objectives appear to be the important Polish cities of Kielce and Krakow. The capture of Kielce will protect the Russian right flank from a German counterattack from the north. The capture of Krakow will give the Russians control of the principal railway and highway center of southwestern Poland, and thus an excellent base position for the extension of their offensive further west into the Silesian industrial region, which is second only to the rear in its importance to German war production. The Russians gained 25 miles in the first day's attack on a front of 37 miles. This suggests that their attack has been launched in great strength after lengthy and thorough preparation, and that it may be expected to be able to carry on with continuous effort, drawing fresh reserves from depth for a considerable period of time. It should be realized that the timing of this great Russian attack is directly connected with the situation on the Hungarian front. There, the Russians appear to be on the verge of knocking out the last remnants of German resistance in the city of Budapest. And though there is no news for the last day or two of the German counterattack northwest of the city, the Germans do not claim that it has made further progress after being checked about 15 miles from Budapest. Indeed, the German communiques have begun to use the word gallant in referring to the German defenders of Budapest, which is usually an indication that the German High Command thinks the end is at hand. This word was applied just before the final curtain to the German defenders of Stalingrad, Brest, Calais, the Sarve Peninsula, the pocket south of the Scheldt Estuary, and other German garrisons which were about to be overrun. Thus it has become a sort of epitaph, never used as long as there seems to be any chance at all. As long as that is so, the Germans use words like invincible. But from the Russian point of view, obviously the best time to launch a major offensive in central Poland, north of the Carpathian Mountains, is just as Budapest is about to fall, just as the full Russian energies in Hungary, south of the Carpathians, are about to be released for a surge northward and westward. Thus the two Russian offensives will complement each other and impose the maximum strain on the German resources to meet them, while the Germans, whose reserves in this area have been heavily drawn upon in the attempt to relieve Budapest, will not have time for any redisposition of their forces to meet the new Russian attack in central Poland. Now here again is Douglas Edwards.
That was Columbia's military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott. And now for an interview with a former New York and West Virginia professional model who has served for 26 months as a hospital ship nurse. Admiral takes you to CBS Washington. Tris Coffin reporting.
The Army nurse is a very important person in the scheme of things today, and we're going to try to find out this afternoon just what kind of a life she leads. Our subject is Lieutenant Virginia Sadis. She has 2 combat stars on her overseas ribbons. She has served 26 months on hospital ships. Part of that time, she treated badly wounded men evacuated from the beachheads in the Mediterranean theater, Africa, Sicily, Italy, and southern France. I might add that the boys who have Lieutenant Sadis as their nurse are very fortunate indeed. She is 28, single, has big blue eyes, and was a professional model in New York before she joined the Army Nurse Corps 3 years ago. Lieutenant, how would you describe your life as an Army nurse?
It is exciting. You learn a lot, and above all, it is satisfying. You feel pretty good to know you can do something for those boys who've been wounded.
We've all marveled at the fine spirits of wounded men in Army hospitals back here in the States. How is that accomplished?
Well, I think there are possibly 3 reasons. There is nothing like a good old American. He can really take it. He doesn't complain even though he is badly wounded, and he shows his appreciation like no one else. I know. We've had all kinds on board our hospital ships, including German wounded prisoner patients. Secondly, a very efficient routine has been worked out. It begins when a medical corpsman picks up the wounded soldier on the field. He's given first aid at a battalion aid station immediately. Then he's taken to a field or an evacuation hospital right behind the front lines for emergency treatment and necessary operations. From there, he is evacuated by hospital ship, hospital train, or hospital plane to the more rear-based hospitals. By the time the men get to us on a hospital ship, they're pretty well taken care of. That is, except for those times when we evacuated men from the beaches, like at Salerno or Anzio. The men were badly wounded, and we worked from 16 to 18 hours a day.
Are nurses by the wounded men all the way?
Yes, from the time they reach the field hospital until they are discharged.
What is that 3rd factor, Lieutenant?
That's the mental lift we try to give the boys. That is very important. Well, about 3/4 of our job in seriously wounded cases. Some of the men feel pretty badly about themselves. They wonder if they can ever return to a normal existence. We nurses know the benefits of modern medicine, and we know they can live a normal life, even though they may be seriously wounded. But they don't know that, and we have to show them. They must have faith in themselves and believe. There's no set routine. You talk to the boys, you kid them, you even bawl them out once in a while, but they like it.
I suppose you see many cases on your ship and wonder what has become of the men.
Yes, you get to have a personal interest in them. We get lots of nice letters from the boys. Once in a while, you may be lucky to see the man again. I remember one whom we picked up from a torpedoed minesweeper. He had 1st, 2nd, and 3rd-degree burns from head to foot. After he recovered from his burns, his problem was learning to use his hands again. I saw him about 5 months later. I'll always remember that. He was getting on a bus, and he waved at me. He was so proud that he had learned to use his hands again, and he wanted me to know.
Thank you, Lieutenant Sadis. I return you to Admiral in New York.
One other item of news from Rome. German forces blocking the Allied drive in northern Italy have been strongly reinforced and today are using the heaviest artillery encountered since Allied troops cracked the Hitler line back in May. The Germans are well supplied with all types of ammunition, and they've been bolstered by a fresh division rushed from Norway and several Italian divisions trained in Germany. With the Apennines covered by deep snowdrifts, patrolling by both sides has been held to a minimum during the last 2 days. Southeast of Bologna, one combat party ran into heavy enemy artillery fire, and northeast of Ferma, a patrol probed the slopes of Ven del Gesso, but was forced to curtail activities because of the weather. An enemy patrol was encountered a mile north of Monte Grande, southeast of Bologna, and forced to withdraw. And that's the news from the Italian front today. Once again, here is Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral.
You'll get more room in your post-war Admiral dual-temp refrigerator. Have you ever wished some manufacturer would build a really roomy refrigerator, big enough to hold all your holiday foods without crowding or forcing?
Yes, I have. And I've often wished that I could stock up on groceries without worrying whether or not I'd have room to store them all. And so often I thought how nice it would be if my refrigerator were big enough so I could take advantage of sale prices and wouldn't have to go shopping so frequently.
Then the post-war Admiral dual-temp refrigerator is going to be made to order for you. When you get a good close-up of the extra-large interior of the dual-temp, you're in for a pleasant surprise. There'll be room to store all those extra foods within easy fingertip reach. No crowding, no bruising of foods, no corners to reach into. Because there are no frost-covered coils, there'll be an unbroken shelf area and no covered dishes. Dual-temp will be the successor to the ordinary mechanical refrigerator, and only Admiral can build a dual-temp. Paper is becoming more and more scarce. The manufacture of many vital war supplies depends on paper. All of us must salvage every scrap of waste paper to keep our war machine supplied. Paper packs a punch. Save it. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral dual-temp refrigerators, Admiral home freezers, Admiral electric ranges. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, Direct from leading news centers